So the date as I'm recording this is October the 5th, 2021. And so what that means is that the 2021-22 Edmonton Oilers season is just around the corner. And as the Edmonton Oilers prepare to start the season, unfortunately, one player that they will have to start the season without is going to be number 15, Josh Archibald. And by now, I don't think that it's going to be any big surprise to anybody listening to this exactly why that is. I think everybody knows by now that Josh Archibald, as a result of a summer bout with COVID-19, he's come down with a case of I hope that I'm pronouncing this right, myocarditis. And so it's a heart problem, and it's actually a threat to not only this upcoming season, he's not likely to play a single game this season, but it is actually a threat to the entirety of what remains of his hockey career. And I think that it's very unfortunate to say this, because it is a reflection of just how much this COVID-19 pandemic has affected, just not just hockey fans, but people in general. But there do seem to be an awful lot of people out there that do seem like they're quite happy that basically this disease might have ended Josh Archibald's career. And it comes down to one of these things that I have been, an item on this list that I've been talking about over the past several episodes. The general Bruce Clark, list of the different items that can cause a person to basically, stop ascending up the rungs of ladder of success in life. And of course, one of those was, the wrong scale of values. And I think that you can look at this both ways. I think that it applies to Archibald, and I believe that it actually does apply once again to what I would consider to be a arguably toxic segment of the Edmonton Oilers fandom. To basically celebrate a disease doing harm to a player basically because they chose not to get the vaccine. I mean, there's a lot to say about that. Josh Archibald, he did choose not to get the vaccine. And while the vaccine isn't 100% effective, it basically means that Josh Archibald, he did have a direct hand, in what has basically imperiled his hockey career. There's no two ways about that. But for somebody to be happy about that, to be basically happy about this, and it is at the expense of one of the Oilers' best, if not the Oilers' absolute best, bottom six forward that they would have had on the team this season. I fail to see where that is constructive. And so I have said this before, and I will say it again. I do think that there is a pretty significant segment of the Edmonton Oilers fan base that does have the wrong scale of values. But let's take a moment and let's consider Josh Archibald's scale of values here. Because really, in my opinion, there are two different principles that are conflicting here. And so one of them, basically, in my opinion, if somebody were to come and say that it was actually unprofessional of him to refuse to get the vaccine, when you consider the fact that basically what this would have done was that this would have left the Oilers out his services for about 33 games of the season. Now, quite frankly, from a man games calculation, especially a man games calculation, weighed against his cap hit, that is probably too much of a sacrifice for a player to expect the organization to make just because he doesn't want to get a vaccine. But then there is the other side of the issue, and is that quite reasonably, I do think that Josh Archibald has every right to decide what he's going to put into his own body or what he's not going to put into his own body. I mean, there are all sorts of issues that we apply this argument of bodily autonomy to. And if you don't have the autonomy to control what goes into your own body, well then really what kind of control do you have over anything related to your life? Obviously not very much. So trying to be completely honest about my views on this situation, I do have to say that I am actually of two minds about that in particular. If anybody's going to tell Josh Archibald what he should or shouldn't put into his body, that I would have a very difficult time, starting with myself in terms of being that person. But at the same time, I mean, I do think that, I mean, if you're going to talk to anybody about getting the vaccine, obviously talk to your doctor. And I think by now we should all have a pretty good idea of exactly what it is that your doctor is going to tell you about getting the vaccine. They're probably going to recommend that you do it. And I do think that that would be good advice. I think it would be good advice. It would be well recommended, to get this vaccine. I think that what has become of Josh Archibald's hockey career is a pretty good indication that this is probably, it's probably wiser to get the vaccine than not to get the vaccine. So because I think we are at risk of this becoming a little bit rambly because it's such an awkward topic, I think basically what we have to look at is we have to look at this through the lens of the scale of values. And so by Josh Archibald's scale of values, what did he decide that he valued more? Well, obviously he valued bodily autonomy more than he valued professionalism. That's not the decision that Duncan Keith made. I mean, Duncan Keith, he made the decision that he valued his professionalism as a hockey player more than he valued his bodily autonomy. And once again, I don't think that I'm the person to tell whether he was right or wrong. I do think that another thing that's very important to keep in mind comparing these two players is that by the time that Duncan Keith, who, as we are all aware by now, I'm sure was also reluctant to get the vaccine, and basically he had to be talked into it by general manager Ken Holland. By the time that he was talked into getting the vaccine, it was already too late for Josh Archibald. By that point, Archibald had already had his bout with COVID. The myocarditis was obviously already a factor. I believe that they didn't discover it until he actually had his preseason physical. And once that happened, that was pretty much it. It was too late. It was all she wrote. And there was nothing more to be said or done about it, and of course there is nothing else to be said or done about it now. And so I do think that there is one more thing that we do need to consider here, and I think that I would almost suggest that there is a difference between being within one's rights and actually being right. And I don't think that's really, I think that we can easily draw the conclusion at this point that Josh Archibald, he was well within his rights to decline to get the vaccine. Now, was he right about that? I think that's a question that Oilers fans are going to be a long time trying to arrive at the answer. I mean, of course, we can look at it in hindsight and we can see that the effect that it had on his career, and maybe therein lies one particular type of an answer. But given the amount of division that there is just within society in general, and the Edmonton Oilers fandom is definitely not isolated from this. I just don't think that's a question that we're going to receive a quick and definitive answer to. There's just too many different perspectives on it, too many different point of views, and in my opinion, really, I have a hard time thinking that either one of them, that any one of them, is absolutely set in stone, exclusively right.